Today is Wednesday, November 6th, and this is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. If you're listening to one of my talks, I think it's safe to assume that you're excited about the results of yesterday's election. I know that there's differing opinions on the personal character of Donald Trump, but in general, seeing the Republican Party win not only the presidency, but also the Senate and have a significant amount of growth in the House of Representatives, and then considering that there's also a conservative majority in the Supreme Court, we've ended up in 2024 with quite an amazing situation. I know I'm very happy about all of these results. One of the reasons I'm most happy really isn't a personal issue at all, but it has to do with my kids because I've got 5 kids in the military, and the thought of them serving some immoral, goofy, liberal political administration is just upsetting to me, and I think it has a real negative effect on the morale of American troops. And seeing a Republican wave come in as we have makes me happy for my kids. You know, last night as we were watching the results come in, my son Jonathan was home. He just became an officer in the 82nd Airborne, and he was standing there, and it started to dawn on him that in God's providence, he basically just signed a 4-year military contract, and he realizes that as of last night, the 4 years of his contract are going to be served with Donald Trump as the President of the United States, with a Catholic Marine as the Vice President. And it was just cool seeing the kids see that and realize that they're going to have some real satisfaction serving under a political administration that they more or less agree with in principle. So that was encouraging, and I'm happy for all the people whose lives are directly affected by who's in office. You know, for me, I'm self-employed. I live out in the country. I'm almost 50 years old. I don't get too wrapped up in politics because it really doesn't reach me, doesn't touch me, doesn't affect me very much. And I know that sounds selfish, but I'm just saying as far as my own personal thoughts and feelings about politics, I tend not to get wrapped up in them too much because they don't directly affect the work that I do. I'm pretty independent of political influence. But my wife and I did vote early, and I felt very encouraged about what I saw when we went to vote. I felt like things were very orderly, very secure. I just have I could say I'm proud to be an American right now. I think America did well in this election. I think America sent a message to the whole world in this election. Because again, we've got a very really incomprehensible situation that's developed. We've got a Republican president, a Republican Senate, the House. I saw today, as of right about now, I think it's up to 205 Republicans in the House of Representatives. 218 would be a majority, so that the Republican Party is close to the majority number in the House. And then in the Supreme Court, there's a conservative majority. And what's crazy, I think Trump has nominated 3 of the current Supreme Court justices, and over the next 4 years, he may have the opportunity to appoint, or nominate, I should say, 1 or 2 more. So this man that everybody goes so crazy about, Donald Trump, he may come to the end of his life having all but appointed 5 of the 9 Supreme Court justices of the United States. When you think of the influence of Donald Trump in in history, in political history. It's really unprecedented. It's very, very rare. And people criticize Trump and they criticize his moral background and all this, and I would be among them because I grew up in New Jersey as a kid, and so we always had Donald Trump in the news because he was a New York guy, but he was also a New Jersey guy. He was one of the owners of the New Jersey Generals back when the USFL first started. He was always involved down in Atlantic City, had casinos down there and stuff like that. So he was always in the New Jersey news. And I always thought of Donald Trump as something of a sleazebag, like a car salesman. That was his image when I was growing up. And then, he went through his whole, what I think is an even sleazier stage where he decided he was going to be a television star and do The Apprentice and all that stuff. So there's a side of Donald Trump that's very ugly, very, very annoying. And it almost costs him victories in elections that really he should win. But there's another side of Donald Trump that you can't deny, and it's the side that we see reflected in his family. He's got a beautiful family in a society that can't figure out how to keep families together. And I know he's had a couple divorces, but again, in the context of American culture, he's been a married man. He's got beautiful kids, relatively respectable kids. And so there seems to be two sides of Trump, this sort of obnoxious car salesman, the kind of guy who comes up with these goofy these goofy products that he sells, like the Trump shoes and the Trump action figure card. You see this like weird grifter side of Donald Trump, but then there's the other side, which is very respectable and really who I wish that he would be. I wish he would just be that family side of Donald Trump. When I hear stories that his kids tell about how they were raised and what he's like in private, you say that's a pretty respectable man. But then when he gets this weird attitude when he's speaking and he just starts rambling and talking nonsense, talking stupid, it's embarrassing, and I wish he would avoid that. However, it takes a certain character to do what he did, and there's just no way to wire somebody for that work without having that person be a little crazy. I mean, the stuff that he's overcome in the past few years, the attacks that he's had to endure over the past 8+ years, the lawsuits, the trials, being dragged into court, the constant attacks all over the media from every different side, the toughness, the mental toughness, and the perseverance that it took for a man to overcome all of the things that he's had to deal with over these past days. It's amazing. I mean, I really don't know how it can be explained from human strength alone. I really believe that God has given him strength and endurance at his age to do these things, mental strength to persevere through all of these obstacles and overcome them all. It's an incredible story. It's an incredible political victory. I've heard some refer to it as the greatest political comeback ever in history. And I'm talking about historians like Newt Gingrich saying things like that. So just, I don't think there's any way to deny that God has given Donald Trump strength to accomplish this. And I think if we learn to look past Donald Trump, as much as anyone who's a conservative owes him an incredible amount of gratitude for what he's had to go through. I mean, just really, again, hard to imagine. But when we look past Donald Trump to the Republican Party moving forward into 2028 and beyond, it's very impressive. The Republican Party of the next generation is very impressive. I mean, you just think about the players that are involved. They're smart, they're influential, they're young, they're cool. You know, you go through all of these different qualities that they have. I mean, we're talking about men like Elon Musk, J.D. Vance, Vivek Ramaswamy, Tucker Carlson. You know, we go down the list. You think about the media influencers like Joe Rogan who got on board in the end. It's a very impressive band of young men and women. You know, you look at the younger Trump kids. You look at Eric and Donald Jr., their spouses, or, you know, I don't like Donald Jr. very much, but Eric and his wife, she just ran the campaign. And everybody's saying, even Democrat opponents are saying it was an amazingly well-run campaign. You know, that's Eric Trump's wife who was running the campaign. Took the head of the DNC, and so on. But if you look, it's a band of young, influential, energetic, conservative, family-oriented Republican Americans. And I think the future is really bright for the Republican Party. I was talking to my wife earlier today and said if Donald Trump can do really well these next 4 years, if he can put in a strong second term, you've got J.D. Vance just waiting in the wings to take over, and he can be in the White House for the following 8 years. So you could have this Trump-Vance connection for the next 12 years, if possible. It really depends on how well the Trump administration goes in this second term, because we see that America has pretty clearly said, we're not interested in this crazy Democrat nonsense. We're not interested in illegal immigration. We're not interested in all of this LGBTQ transgender stuff being forced upon us. We're not interested in that. We're not interested in being characterized as people who want abortions. This is not what American people want to be. We've also seen, you know, one of the great errors of the Democrat Party, which I never understand, is why they make such a big deal out of black voters. The black population in America is like 12 or 13%. And they're just constantly talking about blacks, and ignoring Hispanics, which I think are more like 20% and growing, 20% of the American population. And we saw in the election last night that Hispanics voted for Donald Trump, and he won. So it's, you know, this obsession, it started, I think, when I was in like high school, there became this obsession with black culture, this obsession with like hip hop culture, sports, entertainment, all of this kind of stuff. It wasn't, in high school, it wasn't my class. My class was still more of the traditional American culture, but I noticed it because I had two younger sisters, and in their high school classes, that the culture was totally different. It was around 1995, 1996, where the culture among, I'd say, teenagers really changed and sort of moved into this culture where everyone needs to get into hip hop and rap and embrace urban ghetto culture and this stuff. We see this just dominate so many areas of American life with really no explanation. We see it in advertising. We see advertising campaigns that try to make a very small minority of the American population seem like the mainstream. And I've never understood why they do that, because it's not the mainstream culture, especially in retail and business. It's certainly not the influential culture, and at the same time completely ignore Hispanic culture, which is exploding and growing. I mean, where I live, I attend a parish in rural North Carolina. Our parish is 4/5 Hispanic, and they're a thriving community. I mean, our parking lot at church looks like, like a Ford or a Cadillac dealership. These are families that are thriving in America. I see the houses they build, the houses they buy. You can drive down streets in my town, and there's a big house which was formerly owned by a doctor or a lawyer, and you look and you realize there's a bunch of Hispanic kids running around in the front yard. Hispanics have bought that big house. And so the Hispanic culture is thriving. And yet the Democrats have presented this image in the political arena where all Hispanics are illegal immigrants, and they are all against Republican conservative values, and they're all gonna hate living under Donald Trump, and they're all opposed to these views about closing the border and tightening up immigration and all this. The Hispanics won the election for Donald Trump last night. They were one of the most influential sources of votes and support for Trump, contrary to this whole message. And it's just good to see that. I feel like we're at a time in American history where we're taking this culture that's dominated American life, I think, since the late 1990s, and I hope we're just flushing it down the toilet. That's my real hope. I hope we're taking this generation or two maybe that's been dominated by this love of urban culture, this hip hop culture, this immoral party culture. And I hope that America is just flushing all of this down the toilet, because it's terrible. And when we look on the stage last night at Trump's victory speech, we just see a different generation. Trump's, announcing it as the golden generation in American history, and it may very well be, because there's certainly a moral revolution taking place. There's no question that last night we saw the American people say, we want to live in a morally upright society. We don't want to be characterized by this abortion culture. We don't want to be characterized by this gay, lesbian, transgender culture. We don't want to be characterized by illegal immigration, disrespect for laws. We don't want to be characterized as a welfare society. We're not interested in socialist principles. We want to go back to George Washington, to Abraham Lincoln, to Thomas Jefferson. We want to go back to Theodore Roosevelt. We want to go back to this image of American culture, which I could talk about interestingly. But we want to go back to these good old days of patriotic America, beautiful America. And it looks like we're going to do that. It looks like we're going to do that. And it's very exciting as a Christian. Now, the reason why I wanted to talk about this, what was not just to recap the election, I think most people know that. I want to talk about, or I want to encourage my fellow Christians in America to take action and to respond to this outcome in an intelligent way. We'll hear the Republicans now, especially Trump and those with him, we'll hear them talking about the fact that the Republican Party has received a mandate from the American people. And what that means is by winning quite easily the presidential election, seeing the Senate also win a majority of Republicans, seeing the House heavily populated by Republicans, seeing the court dominated by conservative justices, we have to learn that if you stop listening to the media, if you stop listening to liberal sources and look at what actually exists, look at what actually exists in the American government as the result of decades and decades of American voting, you see a conservative Republican government that has been voted into place by the American people. And I think we have to stop living as Christians in America with this this persecution complex that the government is out to get us and the government is bad and the government is persecuting Christians and we have to live in hiding. We've got to retreat and run away and hand everything over to the unbelievers because the government is against us, the nation is against us, the American people don't want anything to do with. That is objectively and demonstrably false. That idea that Christianity is not welcome in America, that Christian values are not welcome in America, that family values are not welcome in America, that Christian business, Christian education, Christian culture is not welcome in America is directly contradicted by what we see in our government as a result of decades of elections. This is what I'd like to communicate to my Christian friends. Now, I was watching CNN last night responding to the outcome of the election. I was watching them as the results were coming in, talking about, you know, what should the Democrat Party do? What does this mean? What are the consequences or implications of this election, and so on. And one thing that a few of the commentators said is that this election has revealed that the Democrat Party is too far to the left and needs to move to the center in order to align with the will of the American people. And this is very significant, and I want to ask you as a Christian to think about this. The result of this election, the American people have said, we want to move to the right. We want to move towards more conservative values. We do not want these liberal values. And the election results are so clear in expressing that the Democrat supporters are concluding from the results that the Democrat Party, in order to remain relevant and even have a chance in the future, is going to have to abandon the far left nonsense. Van Jones on CNN last night referred to transgenderism as, quote unquote, weird stuff. That's how clear the message is to the Democrats, that Americans are not interested in this stuff. The Democrats are seeing that if they're going to have any hope at having any influence in the future, their party is going to have to abandon this far left stuff, which they thought somehow was going to bring them success, which just reveals that they have reprobate minds. They're going to have to move to the right if they're going to have any chance. And why that's so significant is if the liberals on the left, if the Democrats are acknowledging that they need to move to the right, then I think that Christians need to see that they also have a challenge. They have a responsibility to seize hold of this momentum and move even further to the right. They have to move away from this left center or center position, because it's very clear that the momentum is moving to the right, and Christians have to take advantage of this opportunity and support that movement to the right by actually being more active in promoting Christian culture, in promoting conservative moral values, and so on, promoting Republican government. Christians have to be more aggressive in actively promoting Christian culture, because we have momentum at this time. I don't know if you follow sports much, but sports often comes down to momentum. And as you watch a game, you can just feel the momentum shift during the course of the game. You can see the two teams come out. One team seems to be dominating and influencing, then all of a sudden there's a major play or some significant event in the game, and you feel it's as if the field tilts towards the other side, and you can feel that the other team seems to be running downhill. There seems to be momentum on the other side, and that changing of momentum often determines the outcome of the game. And players and coaches, when they sense that, they try to seize that momentum. This, I think, is what Christians have to do in 2024, 2025, because there is a change in momentum. And all of us have known what it feels like to live under that leftward momentum, which I really don't think comes from the people. I think it really comes from the media and deceives and influences and bullies the American people to think like most Christians do, that, oh, we're persecuted, everything's against us, we've got to retreat, we've got to go hide, we can't do this, we can't do that. This liberal media has caused millions and millions of Christians in America, millions and millions of Americans in general, to think that that's true. That if you express your beliefs or if you express your convictions, you're a racist, you're a bigot, you're prejudiced, you're a Nazi, on and on. This craziness, this crazy anti-Christian rhetoric has effectively persuaded a large portion of the Christian population to actually believe that saying, I don't support immoral culture. We've been led to think that saying that is itself immoral, or is a sign that you're really not a good Christian, or that you're not charitable, and so on. I look at this current dilemma among Catholics. I've spoken quite a bit against this traditional Catholicism. I've spoken against disobedience and disrespect towards the Pope and bishops. I've spoken against clinging to something of a historical snapshot or nostalgic view of Catholicism, because that's what Protestants also do. And I've explained that the traditional Catholics need to be very careful to find the golden mean between a personal preference for historic or traditional or European Catholicism and a duty to continue to honor and obey the magisterium. However, I can't deny the dilemma, almost a paradox, that exists in the Catholic Church, where the hierarchy of the Church will crack down on Catholics who are interested in preserving traditional worship, traditional culture, traditional liturgical rites, and things like that, and then, on the other hand, embrace homosexuality and encourage Christians to be almost passive with respect to the influence of left-wing social movements as they move into the church. That I think the clergy has failed to stand strong and say, no, we have objective teaching in the Catholic Church that's been handed down to us for all time. We've got very clear lines in the Catholic faith. We've got creeds, we've got catechisms, we've got very clearly established principles of moral philosophy, and so on. 2,000 years of the development of Catholic doctrine. This is what it means to be Catholic. There are black lines, very clearly established, carved into the concrete, as it were, and we're not going to move. But you see that it feels like even the clergy has been influenced by this liberal media to think that to say that is racist or exclusive or uncharitable, and so on. We're talking about moral issues. We're talking about moral issues. And then we've got this inconsistency on moral issues where the church takes an incredibly strict position on something like contraception, which is, the church's position on contraception is radical, radically countercultural. And it's impressive to see how the church has drawn the line on contraception and just said, N-O spells no, period. And on abortion, how the church has been so strong on abortion. Even Pope Francis speaks very strongly against abortion. But then to turn around and find another issue, and an issue we could say is equally worse and maybe more destructive and deceiving, and receive that with a kind of quote-unquote pastoral gentleness that really turns out to be unfaithful to Catholic moral teaching. It's very difficult to try to figure out what exactly the hierarchy of the church is trying to accomplish when it comes to moral issues. But what I hope is that all Christians, and I hope the clergy as well, will see this as a time of awakening morally, awakening, I don't want to say spiritually, but evangelistically, culturally, realizing that the message that we've imagined to be true is not true. The image I always give, the illustration I always give is thinking about King Theoden in Lord of the Rings, where he's living under the influence of worm tongue. And he's got this lying, filthy snake constantly in his ear, just poisoning his soul with lies and discouragements about his kingdom, his authority, what he can do, what he should do. And this King Theoden is just rotting under the influence of worm tongue. And he's shriveled up and miserable. His kingdom is in ruins. None of his subjects respect him anymore. He's allowed this lying tongue to influence his judgment and cause him to neglect his duty as a king. And then there's the great scene in the film version of Lord of the Rings where Gandalf comes in disguised and then reveals himself as Gandalf the White and calls Theoden out of this funk and chases Wormtongue out of the kingdom. And then all of a sudden you've got this revived, strong, energetic, courageous leader restored in King Theoden. And that image of Theoden under the influence of Wormtongue, I just feel that illustrates the problem with modern Christianity. We've almost become, for all of the talk, for all of the verbal responding to liberal media and all of this, for all of the talk, we've actually been persuaded by that media. We've actually been influenced by that media. Even though we wouldn't acknowledge such in speech, our actions contradict our arrogant words. We live like the people that the liberal media and liberal politicians would like us to live like. We follow the will of the liberal, immoral influences in our society. Even though we say that we reject them, even though we mock them, even though we talk against them, call them fake news and all this stuff, we actually are under their influence because we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing. We're simply surviving. We're living like Buddhists who think that just avoiding any sort of scandalous behavior is good enough. It's a negative morality. It's a passive morality rather than the active morality that Christ modeled for us and calls us to participate in. He says, go into the world and make disciples. He doesn't say retreat and start stocking up on canned vegetables and get into this, survivalism and go hide out in your basement where you're safe and you can go say your prayers without anybody seeing. That's not Christianity. Jesus says to the church, go into the world and make disciples. He says, you are the light of the world. No one lights a lamp and puts it under a bushel basket, but rather he sets it on a lampstand so that it gives light to everything in the house. We're called the light of the world, the salt of the earth, and so on. We're supposed to be the ones influencing society. We're supposed to be influencing. That's not uncharitable to influence non-Christians. That's the mission of the Christian church. We're not supposed to be waiting for the world to come up with some new fad or some new movement or some new idea and then Christianize it and say, hey, you know what? The world has decided that getting your gender changed is now cool. So we've got this new cool ministry where we embrace transgenderism and we have Christian transgender. No, we're supposed to be the ones influencing society. The mission of the laity, which I always talk about, is to direct temporal affairs according to God's will. We're not supposed to be backpedaling all the time, always withdrawing, always handing things over, always stepping back from the front lines. The front lines of the Christian culture, the Christian community, are supposed to be advancing in the world. And so again, for all the talk, for all of the political talk on social media, all the Christians, making fun of the media and all that stuff, they are actually doing what that media, what those politicians, what those influencers want them to do. They're disappearing, they're retreating, they're backpedaling, and so on. That needs to change. And we've got the opportunity, I should say, all of the excuses have been taken away by the result of this election. All of the excuses have been taken away. To say like, oh, well, we see modern society is different because we need to understand that. No, that's all been proven false. That's all been proven false by this election. There's no movement towards this effeminate, homosexual, miserable, urban culture, socialist world that the Democrat Party there's no support for that in America. That is not the will of the American people. That is a campaign led by liberal politicians and liberal media outlets. That's propaganda. That's a campaign. That's not the American people. That's not society changing. That's a group of people in our culture actually influencing the world according to their own will, according to their own ideas. We're not supposed to, when we think about, loving our neighbor, loving our enemy, being forgiving, being patient, and so on, we're not supposed to be forgiving and patient to their actual efforts to convert us to their side. We're supposed to understand that when we go into the world to influence them, the change is not going to be easy. And so we go into the world and we work patiently, we work gently. We don't try to proselytize in some kind of arrogant, reckless way, but we seek to actually develop real relationships and help people. Not to convert people, but to help people convert. But this idea that whatever idea the media comes up with, we're now all accountable now to adopt that into our Catholic life, and if anyone opposes it, they're uncharitable. That's just craziness. We're supposed to go into the world and make disciples, lead them to the sacraments, and teach them to command everything that Christ has taught us. And we're supposed to be modeling that life, which should stand in stark contrast to the lives of people around us. We're supposed to be shining like stars in the night sky. That is, we're supposed to be living a life of obedience to Christ's teaching, powered and enlightened by the sacramental graces that Christ gave us in the church. We're supposed to be living the life that Christ taught, radically in contrast to the lives of those around us. And we're supposed to be calling people to come and follow us in a better, objectively better, happier, holier, wiser life. That's what Christians are supposed to be doing, and we're not doing that. You look at, go to church on Sunday and look at how Christians dress. They dress according to worldly fashions. They dress according to worldly fashions, and some will say, well, we're supposed to adapt to the cultural norms of... No, what that means is that, you wouldn't walk into American society dressed like a first century Roman, because the clothing that we wear is different. The fabrics are different. The way that the clothing is manufactured and distributed is different. It doesn't mean that if 40-year-old men start wearing shorts and NFL jerseys, that's how you start dressing and going to church, and just say, well, that's how our society... No, it's how bums in our society dress. It's not how men in our society dress. That's not even true. Businessmen don't dress like that. Bums dress like that. So if you want to follow the world, follow the businessmen. There's no excuse for following the bums. And we don't have to embrace modern culture, which is really disgusting in so many ways, and pretend that it's necessary to do so, because we can look and see that people in modern culture reject that culture. So I think that we have an opportunity, we have a set of circumstances where Christians really need to stop making excuses for this backpedaling Christianity. We need to stop making excuses for this retreating Christianity. We need to see that the American people just made it very clear that their desire is to live in a morally upright, orderly, peaceful, just, and prosperous society. That society is the fruit of Christian culture. That society is the fruit of ancient wisdom. And they need Christians to take leadership, assuming that they're qualified to do so, in every different area of life, and say, I'm going to conduct my life in American society as a Christian, living according to Christ's teaching, living a life that stands in strong and crystal clear contrast to the lives of unbelievers around me. I'm going to model the Christian life, show American people what the Christian life can be, and call them to come and join me. And you know what? The American people have just said in this election, that's more like what we want. We don't want this gross culture. We want that culture. We want to be a good people. We want to have good jobs. We want to work. We want to be independent. We don't want welfare culture. We don't want this filthy urban culture. We don't want Cardi B and Beyonce and all of this trash entertainment. We want more beautiful things. We want good things. We want wholesome things. We're thinking about our children. We want good schools. We want good culture. We want the police on the streets to be supported and funded. We want our military to be supported and well-funded. We don't want this gross, immoral culture. That is not what the American people want. And Christians should be ready to respond and say, well, follow us, and we'll make this country beautiful. Because there have been times in America's history where, generally speaking, the culture was beautiful. Now, there were reasons for that, and they're significant. For example, if you go back before 1900, if you go back to 1850, you'll find that most Americans actually lived agricultural lives. It was a beautiful, natural, agricultural society in America. And then in the 1920s and 30s, things were industrialized. Many millions of people moved from farms to cities, and this whole, this urban culture started to develop, which can't sustain itself. And so you have the development of all of these liberal economic policies and things, because you've got these large cities of people who have no food unless the government somehow artificially provides for them. So anyway, Christians have an opportunity to move this whole ship to the right, as it were. And we've got to take advantage of this opportunity because it's a very great grace. If you look back 4 years ago, when Joe Biden got elected, we were in the midst of the COVID mess. We had all of this transgender craziness being promoted all over the place by the media, by politicians. We look at the Biden administration where he had all of these transgender weirdos set in different agencies throughout the government. Pete Buttigieg, a gay man, is appointed director of transportation with zero transportation experience of any kind. We had to live through that, and it felt like our country was just running off the cliff. And to be here in 2024 and have things turn out the way that they have, we had better be grateful for this opportunity to see America move back to the right, but we also better take seriously the obligation that we have now that it's moving to the right to add to that momentum our own efforts and works and restore Christian culture, because we have the opportunity to do that. In the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, obviously, I've worked, in spite of all these things, I've worked to make classical Christian education available in a form that is as pure as it can possibly be. And it's had nothing but success. It was accredited last year, which again testifies against this persecution mindset. The Classical Liberal Arts Academy, I think, is an example of what's possible if we stop making excuses and just work with an optimistic spirit, trusting that if we seek the kingdom of God and his righteousness, that all these things will be given to us, that we'll be successful in these things. We sponsor classical Catholic radio to promote listening to the most beautiful, sacred, and classical music. There's no need to listen to popular music. There's no need to complain that modern songs have lots of sexual references and all this stuff. Don't listen to them. Stop listening to them and it'll change. Stop supporting it. Stop listening to it. Let the producers see that their radio stations and their music sales are dying. And those industries will either begin producing what Christian people want, or they'll go out of business. Let them go out of business. There's no need for us to listen to what happens to be on the radio or support whatever the producers want to give us. We can say, no, we want beautiful music. We want beautiful culture. We want excellent schools. We want kids who study philosophy and classical languages and theology and literature, and who learn to play beautiful music. We want families that work hard and prosper, that live beautiful lives, that are well-dressed and healthy and happy. We're not going to accept life in this miserable, dark culture of death, ghetto culture, as if it's some sort of irresistible wave that God actually wills for us to submit to. We have to learn to say no to that. We're called to go into the world and make disciples. We're called to influence the circles that we can influence according to God's will, and pursuing that with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength is the work that saints do. And rather than talking about saints, rather than sitting in our basement watching saint movies, we've got to ask ourselves, what would the lives of these saints look like in 21st century America if they were living among us? What would these saints be doing if they lived in 2024? What would their lives look like? What would Thomas More look like as an American man? What would St. Dominic or St. Catherine of Siena or Thomas Aquinas or St. Martin de Porres, what would they look like if they were American men today? And we need to become those men. Stop talking about saints, stop reading about stories from 600 years ago and ask, what stories are being written now? What stories are being written today? What men and women are living as saints today? And we need to be those people. We need to be those people. And we have an opportunity to do that. We have no excuse, no natural excuse, no excuse from human weakness, no political excuse to not be engaged in this work of evangelization. Full steam ahead. And so we've got a very interesting situation in God's providence, and I think we're going to be tested. Whether we continue to play this effeminate victim game and make excuses for doing nothing and being lazy and being sloppy and being gross, whether we're going to continue living like that and pretend that we're being oppressed by some great power which doesn't actually exist, or whether we're actually going to respond to the reality of life in American society and realize the American people just expressed their will for life in an upright, conservative society. The popular vote was Republican. The presidency was given to the Republican Party. The Senate was given to the Republican Party. The House is largely Republican. The Supreme Court is largely conservative. I think it's 6-3 right now, and can become even more so over the next 4+ years. There's no excuses for this lazy, excuse-making Christianity. No excuses for Christians just bowing their heads and going and finding garbage jobs working for companies that wouldn't even exist in a Christian society, but rather being the innovators and the creators of new businesses that actually bring Christian principles to play to solve problems in modern society. That's what's needed, and we've got no excuse and all the opportunity available in front of us. And I hope that we seize it because, like I said, there's no excuse for this backpedaling, retreating, effeminate, lazy, sloppy, careless Christianity. No more excuse.